Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen. Indigenous people in this country have higher rates of illness and higher mortality rate than non-Indigenous people. And it's not new that some of this is related to racism in the medical system that is supposed to be treating all patients with care and respect. It's been studied over and over in many corners of the country right up until today. Quebec is currently grappling with the reality that an Atikamekw mother, Joyce Echequan, died after posting a Facebook Live where nurses are heard taunting her with racist remarks. Weeks later, another Atikamekw person died after leaving another hospital in a different community where he overheard staff saying the same things. Despite it all being a long-standing identifiable problem in every province, people continue to die because it's not been addressed, and many others avoid seeking medical care altogether. Today, we hear from people who've been affected, and we'll try to get our heads around the why and how this is still happening as we put racism in healthcare in focus. Of course, it's a call-in show. You can add your voice to the discussion. You can call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also comment on our Facebook Live if you're watching there. Of course, that's on our APTN National News Facebook page. Before we hear from our guests, let's remember back almost 13 years ago when the world turned its attention in shock to a grim reality in this country as a man was literally ignored to death in a Winnipeg hospital.
Brian Sinclair entered a Winnipeg hospital in the fall of 2008 to seek medical help for a minor ailment. The double amputee, who was wheelchair-bound, waited hours for treatment of a bladder infection. He waited and waited for 34 hours. Other patients in the waiting room expressed concern for him. He vomited several times, but he never got to see a doctor. When someone finally checked on him, sitting in his wheelchair in the hospital waiting room, he was cold. Rigor mortis had set in. Brian Sinclair had been dead for hours from a treatable illness. He was seen as nothing more than a homeless drunk Indian. That stereotype and bias killed a man seeking medical help. Racism in healthcare kills Indigenous people across Canada, some too fearful to even go to the doctor, waiting until it's too late. Some receive substandard care or their symptoms dismissed. Some, like Brian, receive no care at all.
That was 13 years ago, and Brian Sinclair's death was supposed to be a wake-up call for the healthcare systems to learn from. All of the cultural training, the inquests, the reviews, and people are still dying of questionable care in this country. This past Christmas, a 50-year-old Ojibwe woman went to a hospital in Hanna, Alberta with flu-like symptoms. Hours later, she was dead. Let's watch a clip from a story by Tamara Pimentel, and a warning, some of what you're about to hear may be difficult.
In the hours leading up to her death, 40-year-old Lillian Ashley lays in a hospital bed with difficulty breathing. Her husband, Corey Ashley, is beside her and took this cell phone video after he says he begged hospital staff in Hanna, Alberta to give her oxygen.
She wanted to live. She deserves to be alive. And this is what I have of my wife.
Now, as he picks up his wife's ashes 200 kilometers away in Calgary, Corey questions her treatment at the Hanna Hospital and why Lillian, a well-respected Ojibwe woman, died December 26, 2020 while in care.
Story on our website, aptnnews.ca. Alberta Health Services continues to investigate Lillian's death, and the RCMP are also investigating what happened at the hospital. I confirmed that with them this morning, that the investigation is still ongoing. Joining us now with an update of what's happened since that story is Lillian's husband, Corey, who I spoke with earlier. Corey, thanks for joining us. I want to start off by offering our condolences. Of course, this is a horrible topic to be interviewed on, obviously, when you took your wife was taken to hospital with flu-like symptoms, and now here we are. The Alberta Health Services is investigating. The RCMP are actually investigating her death at the hospital too. You're also doing your own work. What was the official cause of death, and can you outline your concerns that you had with what happened in the hospital?
Okay. Official cause of death, I was called up and contacted by the medical examiner's office. They told me that they stated, Corey, we found wet lung in your wife. That's the official cause that I was stated. They said that it's going to take anywhere up to 12 months for them to go through everything and come up to the reason why the wet lung happened, what was the actual full cause of the death. my concerns with the hospital was they refused to treat anything. At first, I was really confused as to what was going on because they weren't even looking at my wife. They were, ignoring her. They weren't coming to the room. They weren't doing anything I requested. I had signing authority from my wife in 2019 as, I do everything for her to do with health. I talk with everybody on her behalf. I'm her advocate. Yeah. And they were ignoring me as much as her. She went for her lab work, came back, and they told her, she said, she goes, I'm scared. And she had troubles conveying this because she couldn't breathe properly. Mm-hmm. And she said, they think I'm just here looking for my pills from my medication. She says, they don't believe I'm here and I'm having problems breathing. I can't breathe. She goes, I'm scared. Yeah. That angered me because there's something going on here. They're not listening. Why? I did a lot of research.
Yeah, when we were talking, you're saying, you feel you're more of a medical expert than you kind of ever cared to be. I should share too with our audience, I had a medical professional examine Corey's wife's medical files. But this person had also said that there were several things that jumped out as concerning to her. One of the things was that she was documented in a chart that she had been prescribed methadone by her doctor. And that she had finished that prescription a few days earlier. Tell us a little bit about that. You think that this has sort of framed a narrative around your wife that's untrue, but give us just sort of the other concerns that you have with that being identified in the charts and what you think may or may not have happened.
Okay, well, a quick thing about methadone. There's two different types of methadone. There's liquid methadone. Liquid methadone is used for people coming off of street drugs. It's used for people that were, heavily addicted to it, don't want to be involved in it anymore. They put them onto this, and the liquid methadone is basically pharmaceutical heroin. Mm-hmm. Then there is the pill. Now, the pill is for chronic pain. It's methadone as well. My wife was on 27.5 milligrams. She took 17.5 in the morning, 10 at night to help her sleep with her sleep meds for chronic pain. Now, the reason why she was given the methadone is because my wife in the past, she did have an opiate addiction. She herself, though, put herself in rehab 2018. She went through the course. She did the dry out. She never ever abused opiates again. Mm-hmm. What she did after that was they started her on Suboxone, but it was causing too many problems. There were so many issues, swelling up. It was not helping the pain, stuff like that. We spoke with our personal physician, and he said, well, there's only two pills that we use in a situation with somebody that's had this issue. That's Suboxone and methadone, because it helps them from not falling back into that addiction. So that's why methadone was chosen for my wife.
And you feel that, do you believe that, because I certainly know after the story came out, you had said that there was people who were saying, because she was on methadone, that's the reason why she died. This is just an Indigenous woman with a drug addiction, and that's what killed her. It had nothing to do with the medical care that she received. Do you feel that that's part of what formed her care, that people that she was just viewed as being somebody who took too much methadone?
She, in her report and everything I've gone over, there is so many spots in there where it mentions her methadone, where it mentions drug seeking, where it mentions, abuse. Mm-hmm. They tested for things like cocaine and everything. When my wife, I'm sorry, we were clean. My wife was a good person. She wasn't a drug addict. She tried helping people. Mm-hmm. She helped people get off pills. If you came to our house and you attempted to bring anything in our house that was bad, get out the door. My wife would boot you out herself.
I want to go to the harassment that happened after the story had come out. What you went through, and where you live has a anti-bullying bylaw. Walk us through what happened.
I'm a guy who speaks out about things, okay? I don't hide things. I try to say things, put out where I did in this town right off the bat. We were here for a few months. I made a complaint to a place, and I got bullied right away. I got threatened by this one guy, and he told me he was going to take me and beat me with my own cane. Well, this guy has followed me since then. And I didn't realize he has 5 or 6 different Facebook accounts. And he's abused me under almost every one of them, except for one. He tried to contact me, hey, buddy, and try to pretend he was buddy-buddy with me. When my wife died, this guy put out a video of a dying First Nations woman that was on drugs and started laughing, saying, "Ha ha ha! That's what Corey Ashley's wife looked like." I went to the police about it. I had to call, the police came to me, actually contacted me. We talked about it because we informed them. We found out from our sources about this anti-bylaw. It was put in 2012 in Hanna, Alberta, because of the bullying was so bad. There was actually a write-up that called Hanna Soviet Hanna. There was another write-up that CTV News did. And I was like reading these, and I'm like, oh my God, so there is an actual bylaw. So the police said, we have to contact the bylaw officer. They did. He said, yes, it's the police's responsibility to enforce the bylaw. So the police dug a little further and found out that the town of Hanna has to actually hire a prosecutor to prosecute for this. The town of Hanna refused.
So there's no teeth to the bylaw.
Well, there's nothing to the bylaw. It's never once ever been used. And in a position where I'm in, you know, I'm grieving, I'm angry, I'm pissed off, and I'm fighting for justice for my wife, along with fighting for protection of people in my wife's honor. And here's this bylaw that's supposed to be in use here, and the town refuses to even do anything about it. And I don't think you get much more disgusting than this. That's the problem.
I wanted to ask you about, you'd said, you know, you will not stop pursuing the truth for what happened to your wife in the hospital that led to her death, and you're hoping to prevent another Indigenous family from ever going through this. Tell us about lily cams.
Okay, I started studying the police cams. I did that because I want to know where they were with it, where they're going with it, what exactly is happening. You guys just recently put out a story that helped quite a bit. There was a one-year study done with a 50% increase in protection, less violence, less abuse. You know, 50% is a huge number. Really is. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, this is stuff we need, because no matter what, you have an advocate does not work. I was my wife's advocate. I was removed because they were doing nothing. I decided to record them, a 9-minute, 41-second video. I even stopped that before police arrived, and the police still had me removed. Sorry, they still want you gone, Corey. Well, I didn't know they put me down as violent and threatening, which I was not. But,
no, you were demanding that they give her, you were asking questions and demanding that they give her oxygen, and that's what got you kicked out of the hospital.
That's what got me kicked out of the hospital. So I decided, you know, the only way to actually have accountability 100% of the time is going to be to have them under watch 24/7. And the only way to do that, I came up with the idea of the lily cam. I said, it's a camera, you know, they get up, they put it on, they sign in. As soon as they sign in, the camera turns on. They don't have power to turn it off or anything. That's what we need. So that camera is on 24/7 during any shift that any medical professional is on. Now, another thing people need to understand, the videos go to the sky. They go into what they call a cloud. They cannot just go back, go around the corner, and start watching this video and go, oh, ha, 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 look at this, George has a mole. They can't do that. Nobody can see them. It's protected. And there's going to be ways to have to get to it, but all it is it's a hidden protection system that will stop all this, because they will know they're 100% held accountable for their actions.
You started up a petition for this, is that right?
Yes, I did. I have a petition on change.org.
Change.org, okay.
I have a petition going for the lily cam itself. I do updates daily about stuff. I put pictures of my wife on there, of course. I also started a group, or not a group, but a page on Facebook. It's called Racism, Racial Profiling, When Will It End? Because we've been taught since 1867 to the late 1990s to be racist. Systemic racism in our schools was taught to people. Even to this day, to take a course to be a lawyer, you have to go through a bigotry course. It's like, how does that make sense? Why are we training and teaching people to be like this? It's wrong. And it always has been wrong. So to overcome something that's been ingrained for over 100 years, there's no way to fight it. You know, and the only way to stop this is going to be with 100% accountability. And accountability is what the lily cam will do. It will give that accountability, that protection to people, so people will feel safe. I hear it all the time. People don't feel safe. People are scared to go to the hospital. People would rather sit home sick than go to the hospital.
We hear that. Corey, thank you. I know this is hard to discuss, and we would appreciate if you keep us posted when you hear back about that investigation. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
And thank you for having me, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on a very important subject.
Lillian had, of course, died from something to do with her lungs. It was called wet lung. The Alberta Health Services investigation that's ongoing will determine if the care that she did or didn't receive at that Hannah Alberta Hospital had anything to do with her cause of death. We have to take a break, but before we do, I want to share a clip from Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller from earlier this week. This is in response to the Quebec government's refusal to acknowledge systemic racism in their healthcare system. Later in the show, we'll unpack all of that. But I wanted to leave you with this from Mark Miller about what he says about medical racism.
I've said time and time again, I disagree with Quebec's assessment about systemic racism, but I've also seen flickers of hope and concrete action from the government of Quebec in willing to address this. There's much more work to do, and if everyone thinks that there's a short-term fix, they're not understanding the problem.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. Let's go to social media now with our social media editor, Jesse Andrushko, to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic.
Thanks, Melissa. Online, we wanted to hear your thoughts about racism in healthcare. Let's take a look at some of the comments. First, from Richard. Yup, it's real. Doesn't matter how settlers try to spin it or play it off like it doesn't exist. Lori commented, these so-called medical professionals need to take a very serious look at their choice of career and perhaps step back from such. There is absolutely no justification for racism or racial stereotypes within the medical profession. None. Lastly, from Charles. For decades, they always say they now see, like they're going to do something about it. It never changes. It's who they hire. Thank you to everyone for sharing their comments. If you want to share your thoughts on medical racism, here's how. Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Last year, the BC government ordered a review of how Indigenous people fare in their healthcare system. The review was conducted by former Judge Mary Ellen Terpel Lafond and a team of Indigenous women investigators. Their report was released last fall. It was titled In Plain Sight. Among the findings, 84% of Indigenous people that they interviewed had personally experienced racism or discrimination from healthcare professionals. A follow-up report was released last month. Joining us now to discuss what else was learned is Mary Ellen Terpel Lafond herself. Thanks for joining us, Mary Ellen.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so curious to know, when you were tapped to do this review, what did you think you would find?
Well, I wasn't really sure what I was going to find. I mean, I've worked quite a bit in the justice system and the child welfare system, where First Nations, Métis and Inuit have frequently experienced massive discrimination and difficulty. But this is the healthcare system. So I was expecting it to be more about wellness and supporting health, and perhaps to have changed or be different than other systems. So when I was briefed about this area, they said, maybe it's more of a rural, remote problem. It's not like a big city problem. And lo and behold, when we did gather the evidence, we found that the racism at the point of care, where people actually get care, was pretty much there in all areas of the province of British Columbia. And it wasn't really super significant, the difference between like rural and urban, or one region or another. The stereotypes that people have about Indigenous people and First Nations people especially, we're still in that system, and they're still really guiding and impacting the treatment that First Nations people receive when they go to get care.
There was a lot of bombshells for me when this report came out, when both reports came out. I'm curious, as you're going through it, what was most shocking to you, or what stuck with you from what you learned in this report?
Well, I suppose I should not be shocked, but because I was trying to like see what the evidence said, and it wasn't an advocacy report, it was collecting, and I gauged, 10,000 people, like so thousands of healthcare workers, thousands of Indigenous people. It was a bit like turning on a fire hose. Like once we opened the 1-800 number, the report line, the cases just rolled in, and including to this day, like we still have that 1-800 number open as we're building proper complaint processes. The cases were pretty amazing, and they were not only just older cases of something that had happened in the past, some of them were real time. Like, I'm at the hospital today and I can't get care. What do I do? So that kind of like, so I found it was very important that we had good cultural support, good elders and others to guide and support our team, because the trauma. But what I was really shocked about was how severely the prejudice and discrimination in healthcare has affected women. Women, young women, but women in reproductive years, like not getting good maternal fetal support, postnatal, and then women in menopausal time, not getting support, being sick for treatable conditions, not wanting to get treatment because they've been treated so badly and can't navigate the system. They don't have primary care. So I was shocked by how it's impacted women and elders. So over 65, the attachment of First Nations over 65 to primary care was like, only about 60% what it is for non-Indigenous people. So that means like elders, that's a time of your life where you need care.
For sure.
You need to get often minor issues adjusted so you can be back up on your feet. Plus our elders are transmitting language and culture. Also elders, like particularly women, they may be 50s or 60s, but they're raising grandchildren and they're taking care of people and they're sick and they're not getting care. So what I was really concerned about was how these issues are, like the report says, in plain sight, but we're not making enough progress. So it was really shocking.
There's, 84% of the people that you guys talked to said that they shared their personal experiences with racism in the system when seeking health care. Is there a common thread to it all, or is it just all based on just profiling of Indigenous people in general?
Well, and I have to give a trigger warning because your listeners are going to be familiar with these concepts, but the stereotypes, the pernicious stereotypes that I think people like my parents' generation faced, and they're still there. So these were the top stereotypes in BC, and maybe they're worse elsewhere. Maybe they're the same. I don't know. But, that First Nations and Métis are less worthy, drinkers or alcoholics, drug seeking. A lot of attitudes that First Nations and Métis parents are bad parents because of all the negative information in the healthcare system from the child welfare system. That First Nations are frequent flyers. That was a phrase, frequent flyers in the emergency room. And the thing is, the reason why First Nations people are in the emergency room is because they don't have primary care. So what are they supposed to do? Get no care? Then they're labeled like, well, we have a frequent flyer here. And that's like, it's kind of dehumanizing to somehow blame people for the fact that they're trying to get care in the only door they can get that care. And I know emergency rooms are stressed in the pandemic, but then they're not treated as well in the emergency room. And there's a lot of hostile and abusive interaction. So the stereotypes were really profound, and the stereotypes drive what I call abusive interactions, verbal, physical abuse, security getting called, and sometimes medical mistakes, ignoring and shunning people. So this has impacted the health and well-being of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for a long time. It's now out in the open, but it didn't change just because we brought it out in the open. The issue is now we have to actually deal with it. And what First Nations people said to me especially was, Mary Ellen, give the racism back to the system. It's not our problem. It's their problem. They need to deal with it. And I think that's where we are today, is the system needs to deal with it. And we have to stop shouldering the responsibility to fix a broken system. It's the healthcare system needs to do the fixing.
Absolutely. I was going to say, BC seems to be miles ahead of many other jurisdictions, in terms of wanting to tackle this problem. But we're still doing stories there and, of course, elsewhere of people that are running into these problems, even though it's all been identified, like you've laid it out there. Why hasn't it stopped? You would think the medical system, when they're handed a report like this months ago, it would, even if they don't make a planned attack to kind of deal with it, you just think if you're a nurse or a doctor or anybody in that system reading that, it would impact how you do your job and how you treat Indigenous patients. But we're still seeing, you know, stories of people getting substandard care. Why?
Well, first of all, I think the BC review, like I do lift my hands up to the Minister of Health and the government of BC, because they said, come in and look at it. We don't want you. We want you to turn every stone over, like look at it. And they accepted it. And they did that in part because they did adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And Article 24 of that declaration says Indigenous people have the right without discrimination to access all health services. So they had to look at it, which was good. And they were really good. But what I've found in the report and what I found in the system is, well, we may have like people studying Indigenous health. We have some Indigenous health practitioners in the system who themselves have experienced a lot of racism, by the way. Yeah. But what we don't have is at the point of care where you get care, the kind of cultural safety, cultural humility, anti-racism work with Indigenous people of the territory done. So we haven't had real reconciliation opportunities. Like I said, at the point of care, some of these care centers need to have apologies to the First Nations of the territory and begin to work with the cultural knowledge keepers and others on protocols, to have staff in the hospital. Like you have to have it in the point of care. So if we're talking about racism and working on it somewhere other than the point of care, we're not dealing with it there. So there's been a real hostility to do it. At the same time, I would say in BC, we've turned a corner. The docs of BC, the nurses, the hospitals, the health authorities now say, we want that kind of support. And in fact, what they've been saying to me more recently is, we're really stressed trying to do this job because we don't have good tools clinically to support Indigenous people that are coming in. We probably haven't done a good job supporting them. There's been a lot of bad interactions. We want to turn it around, but we need some good training. We need to have those partnerships with First Nations. And with the pandemic, it's so hard for people to come in, be present in place. So once the pandemic conditions ease, this work, reconciliation work on the ground, will be really important to improve access, but also teach healthcare workers skills about how they need to interact respectfully and appropriately culturally with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, because they really don't have skills. They don't have training. Like the training is so deficient and the stereotypes are so prevalent.
It's crazy to me that we have to train people to treat other humans like humans in the way that they would treat somebody of a different race or culture. You know, I want to ask you, you know, in researching for this story, Beverly Anders, who co-produces with me, like just in the past year alone, she's like, there's nearly a dozen stories from across this country that we've covered here at APTN News about people getting questionable care, you know, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis people. I'm curious, the findings that you found in BC, do you believe that similar findings would be found pretty much anywhere in the country?
Yeah, I think, you know, I found hundreds and hundreds of cases, like thousands of cases, and I just opened the investigation in July and then did the report in November and another report in February, and the cases continue to roll in. So British Columbia cannot be the anomaly. So the methodology we used, which was really rigorous, that methodology could be used anywhere, but the key ingredient is this. People need to be prepared to look at it, and they be prepared to do something about it. Yeah. In British Columbia, we have turned the corner. We're far from dealing with it, but we've turned the corner. But I look at, like, you know, the prairie provinces where I have lots of family, loved ones, and community, and, you know, I hear nonstop concerns, and no one is looking at it. Or you have one Indigenous person who's a doc, or one Indigenous person who's a nurse, and they've been trying to surface it. And remember, Indigenous people in healthcare who have been speaking up about racism for years, that's frequently career limiting for them. It often means that they don't become the directors of medicine.
It's so true.
They don't get, so it's not something that's been rewarded. Addressing racism has been something that's been silenced and punished. So I want more speak up culture, more Indigenous people, but I do think it is a national issue. And even though this information has come out, we need a lot more truth-telling process so that people can be heard. But also, you know, people have been really grotesquely mistreated. And when I think about, especially today, you know, like a First Nations woman who maybe doesn't have any prenatal care and goes to an emergency room to deliver a baby, like that's That's third world, fourth world conditions.
That's crazy.
That should never happen. We should have Indigenous midwives, and that should be built. So I think about these are very fixable issues.
Yeah.
But I am quite upset about the fact that there would be that First Nations woman out there today who was so poorly treated in the past that she didn't want to actually get health care because the health care wasn't respectful to her.
Yeah.
And that has to end.
Well, I don't think that it's just necessarily even the healthcare system. I mean, you know, from your work in child welfare, a lot of women aren't seeking prenatal care because they look and go, I don't want them to be birth alerting me and flagging me because I'm Indigenous having a child. We have a caller. I want to go to right now, Josh. Josh, are you there?
Hello, Tanje.
Hey. Hi, how are you, Josh?
Great, how are you?
Good, I'm good. What did you have to add to the conversation, or did you have a question for Mary Ellen?
No, I just wanted to add, and I know you guys talked about that aspect of, having to train people, and it's just, it is really sad that we're at that point, and we're still at that point, and we've been at that point for a long, long time. So I do go around and do that. We go around and offer cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness training. I am Métis, I am McChiff, so I do bring that perspective when I go talk. It's a living experience. So we did go one time to a hospital here in Edmonton, and we provided just that, cultural sensitivity training, cultural awareness. And it was really sad to just see that the folks there, they just did not want to listen at all. They were really just questioning us. We got up there, just wanted to share our experience, and this is what we're here for. You brought us in, thank you so much. And there was actually a lady there that was saying, well, you folks, you're coming from a place of anger. And she was already trying to really discount and downplay, what we're brought in to do. Right? We're here to share our experience and help guide you among this cultural awareness training and that kind of stuff. So the really crazy thing was, it was just a disaster in general. We didn't feel good about it at all after. And then after that, we sent them an invoice for the services, and then they told us that they actually didn't have funds to pay us for bringing us in.
Wow.
Right. So that even further discrediting what we're bringing in, what we're doing. And I always think of that stereotype thinking, well, Indigenous people, they don't take money. You can just give them, tobacco, or you can just give them this.
Oh my God.
That kind of stuff, and those stereotypes absolutely live 110%.
And to think that these are the people that are looking after us, our grandparents, our children, and we're trusting these people to give them the best care. And then you hear stories of, even just having to have training for medical professionals to train them to not stereotype us or to treat us a certain way. Certainly, I don't mean myself included, because I show up and they think it's a white lady, so I don't have to deal with it, certainly, but, for the people who do. Josh, thanks for calling. And Mary Ellen, we're out of time for this segment. I thank you so much. I had other questions for you, but we'll have to pick up on them at another time. I would love for you to do a course for premiers. Here, take what we've done here, and here's what I'd love for you to go and do, and lay it all out for them so they don't have an excuse to be confused about it.
Thank you so much.
Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, we're joined by reporter Lindsay Richardson, who has extensively covered medical racism in Quebec. Stay with us. Welcome back. Another story putting Canada in international headlines for all of the wrong reasons was the death of an Atikamekw mother in Quebec, a mother of 7, who live-streamed as medical staff taunted her with racist and derogatory remarks as she lay in a Quebec hospital. Well, since then, Quebec physicians, academics, and social workers are blasting the provincial government there for failing to recognize Joyce's principle, which was drafted by the Atikamekw Nation to address systemic racism in healthcare there. Here's Tom Fenario with the latest.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Yann Lafreniere insists that his government is working to fight racism.
Since November, we've been announcing different measures, and people can judge us on what we do.
The Indigenous Affairs Minister for Quebec recently announced the creation of several new positions to address racism towards Indigenous people in healthcare. The public health authority that oversees the hospital where Joyce Echaquan died is now hiring 2 liaison officers, a complaints commissioner, and has created an Indigenous relations role. All the hires will come from Echaquan's community of Manawan.
There is racism in Quebec. There are people that are racist. And that's the reason why we put in place measures to stop that.
While the Quebec government recognizes that racism exists, they say systemic racism does not. As a result, they are not adopting Joyce's principle. Created by the Atikamekw Nation, Joyce's principle calls for Quebec to recognize systemic racism. The fact that the province refuses to take on a First Nations-led endeavor to combat racism is drawing fire.
It's unfortunate it's still going on and people's lives are at stake.
Darlene Kitty is a Cree family physician in Chisasibi First Nation, near the James Bay. She points to the findings of Quebec's own Vien Commission, a 2-year inquiry into Indigenous peoples' relationship with public services, as proof that systemic racism plagues the healthcare system.
Still, the current government does not accept that there's systemic racism, but we know there is. We know for sure. It's been happening for decades.
She's not the only one demanding the province recognize systemic racism. An open letter is blasting Quebec Premier François Legault for failing to adopt Joyce's principle. The letter, penned by Samir Shaheen Hussein, a Montreal pediatrician, calls the government's refusal harmful because systemic racism causes unnecessary suffering and, in extreme cases, quite literally, kills people. For his part, Lafond says he was happy to read the letter.
You see that people are quite interested in the matter. We agree to disagree on the definition of systemic racism, and we don't want to fight on words. We want to fight on racism.
We've had intentions. We've had these things be said to us. We're patiently waiting for decades, for centuries, for at this point, for our rights. At one point, you tend to ask is, what exactly are we supposed to do in order for us to get this basic need?
Alicia Tokiapik was the first Inuk woman to run in a provincial election in 2018. The Nunavut community worker says it's baffling that the province is continuing to deny the existence of systemic racism.
The systemic racism that he denies shouldn't have gone this far to be dragging on where it's quite obvious it is existing, especially with Indigenous people.
Meanwhile, the investigation into the circumstances surrounding Echaquan's death continues. Quebec's coroner has announced public hearings to begin in mid-May. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Reporter Lindsay Richardson has extensively covered the issue of racism within Quebec's establishment, including in the healthcare system. She joins us now. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us. So I want to, first of all, what did Joyce die from? Do we know that?
No, as it stands, Melissa, we're still waiting for the release of the coroner's inquiry and all of the other subsequent internal investigations that were announced at the time of her death. So it's still a mystery. We have heard that there may have been an allergic reaction and that Joyce was trying to make clear that there was a certain medication that she was not supposed to be given. But from our understanding at this point, there was a language barrier that may have prevented her from doing that.
Right. And Joyce's principle, I'm curious, what exactly is the sticking point with regards to accepting the notion of systemic racism in a healthcare system?
You know, Melissa, I'm just a reporter, right? And in this show today, we have a lineup of, academics and people who've experienced this healthcare system firsthand and these shortcomings firsthand. So it is really kind of incredible that the debate among policy makers here in Quebec is really hinging on the use of the term systemic racism. Premier François Legault thinks that it doesn't exist. He thinks that racism here in Quebec is very much an individual problem, that the systems here in Quebec were not constructed to purposely sublimate or disregard people's human rights. Mm-hmm. But what he's also maintaining in this whole discussion is that, A, he should be judged based on his actions and not his acceptance of this term or rejection of this term. And to Quebec's credit, there have been some investments made and some changes made to directly respond to Joyce's passing. But this issue of systemic racism it seems very much like the CAQ government. It's the hill they're willing to die on. That
interesting.
This is not a systematic issue, that this is a one-on-one thing that could, for the most part, probably be resolved through education or training or the initiatives that they're introducing. So we'll wait to see how that plays out and what impact that has on the ground.
I guess we'll
still
have to.
Very much Yeah, lack of agreement still at this point.
Well, it's interesting. We heard from Mary Ellen Terpel Lafond before the break here, and she was saying, you know, all the work that she's done in BC. BC said, look, we believe that there's an issue with racism in the system. Let's go and rip it apart and find out. And of course, her report comes back, and it's possibly worse than what people even thought would be in there. And I'd asked her, you know, do you believe that this is just specific to BC, or do you think you have similar findings elsewhere? And she was very quickly to answer, like, yeah, I think you probably have similar findings all over the place. So it's interesting when you have a premier in one province saying there's no way that it's here. It's just individuals who happen to be racist, maybe work in the system, but the system itself doesn't have any problems. I want to take a look at a video that Joyce Echaquan filmed while she was in the hospital. Many people may not have seen this, and just an alert, it's hard to watch.
Faites des mauvais choix, Madeleine.
Ouais. Hey, t'étais pas ça. Le meilleur pour autre chose, ça.
Hein?
Surtout que c'est nous autres qui font ça.
Not long after that filming that, Ms. Echaquan had passed on. So, Lindsay, Quebec got millions of dollars from Ottawa to fix the system, you know, in the wake of Joyce's death. What's Joyce's family received from this?
We're still waiting to find out what the outcome is going to be there, Melissa. I'll be honest with you, it's likely going to be a months-long process. A lawyer representing the family did move pretty quickly to announce a series of lawsuits. I believe there is a civil suit in progress. There was a suit against the hospital also in progress. And it was also mentioned that the family will be applying for crime victims compensation, which is very interesting, seeing as the report, you know, concluding Joyce's cause of death hasn't yet been released, and there hasn't yet been a conclusion that a criminal act was committed here. There are public audiences that will be happening as part of the coroner's investigation. So there's some movement, but it's just a very slow process here. And I can't speak for the family. We haven't spoken to them in quite some time now, but the Atikamekw Nation has escalated this complaint about Joyce's principal to the UN. I mean, they're using Joyce Echaquan as the example, you know, for this widespread systemic problem that they say violates human rights across the board. You know, so what that means in the end, we're not sure. Whether the UN can compel Canada to act, likely not, but it may add that additional pressure that governments need to really start to get the ball moving faster and with the urgency that people are expecting to see.
Yeah. You know, in Quebec, too, something else I wanted to ask you, Quebec has done a lot of reviews, you know, racism within policing and all this. Is it curious to you as a reporter, you've covered all of these things, is it curious to you as a reporter that why is the line drawn at healthcare?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think we can argue that policing systems, like the RCMP was created, you know, with a colonial purpose. That is why they existed. So people can argue whether that purpose is still being enforced today, but fundamentally, it is an organization that was meant to police Indigenous peoples. Healthcare systems, I think it is a little bit more nebulous because it is a caregiving system. So I think that people within that system are a lot less likely to accept that they may not be giving the quality of care that they initially set out for. But what I think is important is the self-awareness in all of this. You know, taking my journalist hat off for a second here, you know, all of my immediate family members work in the hospital system. I spent 5 years working in a hospital myself. So to find ourselves at this point where we can question those protocols and what's going on behind the scenes, I think is a fundamental part of being able to move forward and make changes, is acknowledging that we may have unknowingly participated in things that are contributing to a larger problem.
I love to hear that too. And you know, in Tom Fenario's story that we just watched before talking to you here, there are doctors and nurses, there's medical professionals who are saying, you know, this is a problem. Are you seeing, is it doctors, nurses, their organizations, groups of them, specific hospitals, are they grabbing this and making this their problem, saying this as a discussion that's long overdue?
It would be difficult to track, I think, from hospital to hospital, and I think for the same reasons that, you know, Joyce's case was so exceptional because we had video evidence. You know, we could unequivocally say that what happened to her would not have been acceptable for anybody. You know, if you're Quebecois, if you're, you know, First Nations, if you're Inuit, but you know. It's hard to say how aware other systems are because we don't know how many complaints are being brought forward, how many times something similar has happened and people have not spoken up. So all we can really say is now with these incidents, you know, having happened within the last year, that there will be hopefully more self-awareness for these institutions and that there will be a little bit more self-reflection and self-criticism where these issues are concerned.
Yeah. Can you tell us about Georges Hervé Awashish's death? That happened in another community just weeks after what happened with Joyce. Give us a little rundown of that.
It's another really heart-wrenching story here. So Georges Hervé Awashish is an Atikamekw man from Opitsawan. He was hospitalized at Chicoutimi Hospital, and while there, he alleges that he overheard staff members making comments and jokes about the Joyce Echaquan case. And on top of that, he also alleged that these nurses made comments about potentially putting him out of his misery as well. So he was discharged from hospital and then ultimately brought back for follow-up and ended up dying in Chicoutimi Hospital. An investigation was announced at the time, and I'm told that they didn't find anything criminal or any sort of intent there. But the family, just like Joyce's family, I imagine, are left with a lot more questions than answers at this point. But as far as we know, no legal action has been announced against the hospital or against the government.
Lindsay, it's always great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to watch a story now about what happened with George. This is a story from La Converse, a Montreal-based journalism website. They obtained an exclusive interview with him just before he died, and they shared that with APTN's Tom Fenario. We can share it now with you. Take a watch.
Sleep well, Dad. This is the last message Shaunuk Awashish sent his father, Georges Hervé Awashish, because Georges Hervé never woke up. He died 2 hours later. But before that happened, the 53-year-old man spoke to La Converse media from his hospital bed, where he described overhearing healthcare workers laughing about the Joyce Echaquan incident and making what sounds like death threats.
En revenant de la toilette, j'ai entendu des gens parler, des infirmières parler. Après ça, j'ai entendu parler un des infirmières en disant, il dit, on a un Indien ici couché dans la chambre. Il dit, on devrait l'injecter sur le produit toxique. Il dit, son problème va être réglé, il marche plus pareil.
Awashish said with the help of family, he immediately left the hospital. But the state of his health forced him to return days later.
Je suis même pas à l'aise, j'ai de la misère à dormir encore cette nuit.
A few days after this interview, Georges Hervé Awashish died at the Chicoutimi Hospital. Citing confidentiality, the hospital says they will not comment on any of its patients, but mentions that an external investigation regarding the alleged incidents is ongoing. Before dying, Awashish said that he wanted to make sure that what he experienced doesn't happen again.
Ben, c'est sûr que moi, je ne laisse pas passer ça, là, à des menaces de même. Je veux plus que ça arrive, ça, à d'autres patients. C'est vraiment décevant qu'est-ce qu'ils jouent de. Je trouve bien décevant.
The funeral for Awashish will be held once his body is returned to his home community of Opitsawan. Tom Fenario, on behalf of La Converse, Montreal.
We are all out of time for putting medical racism in focus. So thankful that Corey, Mary Ellen, and Lindsay could join us for this conversation. Thanks to all of you, of course, for tuning in. If you want to listen or share or listen to this again or share it with somebody else, you can download this episode as a podcast on our website at aptnnews.ca/podcast. All of our shows are on there, so take a browse. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for joining me. Next week, Daryl Stranger is going to be a guest host here with a sports-focused InFocus for you. Don't miss it. Have a great afternoon, but I want to leave you with this, a little bit from a story that we did earlier this winter. It was another heartbreaking story. This is in BC. Sarah Morrison gave birth to her first child, but left the hospital with empty arms and an empty heart. The Haila woman says she was turned away, ignored by the healthcare system in BC, just when she needed it most. Here's Kathleen Martins with that story and a note of caution. It involves the death of an infant.
Hi, Carly. I decided to make this for you right now. There's your mom. Okay, this is when you're being born. There's Dad. I'll let you see. I don't know how to turn it on because I'm not very good with apples.
Ronnie Luft's video diary was supposed to tell a happy story for him and Sarah Morrison and their newborn daughter. Instead, it's now evidence in the Kitimat couple's lawsuit. They're alleging they received negligent medical care and were subjected to racial stereotyping. It began on January 27th at the Kitimat Hospital, where Sarah Morrison, who was overdue by 2 weeks, came after starting to have contractions just before 7 p.m. There she learns that her baby's heart rate is strong. According to their lawsuit, Morrison's pregnancy was uneventful, but the doctor wouldn't admit her.
And he said, that he couldn't do anything for us, and that we should have just went to Terrace.
Morrison says the couple left the hospital to call an ambulance.
And they came, picked us up at the front, and brought us to the back where the emergency is. And then we sat there for a while, and the ambulance attendant asked us if we could pay. Said, I don't care how much it is. We'll pay.
According to Morrison, the ambulance attendant refuses to drive them to Terrace.
Morrison and Luft still had high hopes they were going to meet their daughter that night. Her father had met them at Kitimat Hospital and raced her here on the highway about a 45-minute drive to Terrace. Her contractions continued, her stress was rising, but they were still feeling positive. But then things took a turn for the worst.
It was 8 p.m. when Morrison arrives at the hospital in Terrace. She says she's never been here before. Yet the lawsuit alleges her medical chart contains erroneous information and racial stereotyping, including that she was in an abusive relationship, her parents have diabetes, her parents are alcoholics and recovering from drugs, and that she was depressed.
And then they brought us to a room, and the doctors strapped me to the bed for a thing that was supposed to monitor my contractions, and they were trying to find her heartbeat for a very long time, and they said they were having difficulties, so I tried to ask for a C-section. I begged for a C-section, and all the doctor said was that he didn't see the point.
Morrison says the doctor voices concerns about her health.
It wouldn't be in best interest for my future pregnancies, and I said she is my future, please save her. And he just ignored me.
Morrison says she delivers her daughter naturally just before 2 a.m. on January 28th.
And then when I gave birth, all they did was wash her off and hand her to me. They wouldn't resuscitate her.
Morrison's mother was present during the birth and again during this interview for support. Morrison says Luft was too overcome with grief to participate. Morrison and Luft allege the death of their daughter was preventable. They are suing both hospitals, 5 doctors, a nurse, and the Northern Health Authority of BC. They're claiming the injuries were caused by the doctor's negligence. The defendants breached their duty of care and the standards expected of a doctor in the province of British Columbia, in combination with treating the plaintiffs with deliberate and racial indifference, the claim says. None of the allegations have been proven in court. The health authority sent out a statement saying it will look into the allegations of anti-Indigenous racism. These allegations are taken extremely seriously, and we believe that the review underway will allow us to understand what occurred from the experience of this family, the staff, and physicians.
I tried resuscitating her for hours.
You did?
I did. I did everything for my baby. They didn't do anything. All they did was
Luft and Morrison say they are suffering emotional and psychological trauma, anxiety, loss of the will to live, grief, shame, and embarrassment. No one has filed a statement of defense yet, and there's no timeline to complete the review into finding out what happened to Sarah Morrison